abruptly, absolutely, abstractly, abundantly, academically, accordingly, accurately, actively, actually, additionally, adequately, admirably, admittedly, affectionately, afterward, almost, alternatively, altogether, amazingly, angrily, anxiously, apparently, appropriately, arbitrarily, arrogantly, automatically, awkwardly, badly, barely, basically, beautifully, beforehand, beneficially, bitterly, blindly, boldly, bravely, briefly, brightly, brilliantly, briskly, broadly, busily, calmly, carefully, carelessly, casually, certainly, charitably, cheerfully, clearly, closely, collectively, comfortably, comparatively, compassionately, competently, completely, confidently, consciously, consequently, conservatively, consistently, constantly, constructively, continuously, conveniently, correctly, courageously, critically, culturally, daily, dangerously, decisively, deeply, definitely, deliberately, delicately, desirably, desperately, differently, diligently, directly, discreetly, distinctively, distinctly, dramatically, eagerly, easily, economically, effectively, efficiently, effortlessly, eloquently, emotionally, energetically, entirely, equally, especially, essentially, ethically, eventually, exactly, exceedingly, exclusively, expeditiously, explicitly, extensively, extremely, faintly, fairly, faithfully, familiarly, famously, far, fast, fatally, firmly, flexibly, fluently, formally, formidably, freely, frequently, fully, furthermore, generally, gently, genuinely, gracefully, gradually, gratefully, greatly, grimly, happily, hard, hardly, harshly, hastily, healthily, heartily, heavily, helpfully, highly, honestly, humbly, ideally, imaginatively, immediately, immensely, importantly, impulsively, inappropriately, incompletely, incredibly, independently, indirectly, individually, inevitably, informally, initially, insightfully, instantly, instinctively, intellectually, intensely, intentionally, interestingly, introspectively, invariably, jointly, joyfully, just, keenly, kindly, largely, legally, legitimately, lightheartedly, lightly, likely, literally, locally, logically, loudly, mainly, marginally, mechanically, mentally, merely, mindfully, moderately, mostly, mutually, narrowly, naturally, nearly, necessarily, negatively, neutrally, normally, notably, obediently, objectively, occasionally, officially, often, openly, optimally, optimistically, originally, outwardly, painfully, partially, partly, patiently, perfectly, permanently, persistently, personally, philosophically, physically, plainly, pleasantly, politely, positively, possibly, potentially, practically, pragmatically, precisely, predictably, preliminarily, primarily, privately, professionally, progressively, properly, publicly, purely, quickly, quietly, randomly, rarely, readily, realistically, really, reasonably, recently, regularly, relatively, relentlessly, reliably, remarkably, remotely, repeatedly, respectfully, respectively, roughly, rudely, sadly, safely, satisfactorily, scientifically, securely, seemingly, selectively, sensibly, separately, seriously, sharply, shortly, silently, similarly, simply, slowly, smoothly, softly, sparsely, specially, specifically, steadily, strategically, strictly, strongly, successfully, successively, suddenly, suitably, superbly, surprisingly, tactfully, technically, temporarily, terribly, thankfully, theoretically, thoroughly, thoughtfully, tightly, totally, traditionally, truly, typically, ultimately, unanimously, unexpectedly, unfortunately, universally, unnecessarily, unquestionably, urgently, usually, vaguely, valiantly, verbally, very, vividly, warmly, weakly, weakly, well, widely, willingly, wisely, wonderfully, wrongly, yearly, yesterday, yet, zealously, zestfully,